The samurai are remembered as the loyal servants of their lords, bound by the strict code of Bushido and ready to give their lives in the name of honor. But not every samurai fit into this system. Some became outsiders, rebels, or simply men without a place in the world. These were the Ronin, the masterless samurai. Their very name means wave man, drifting like waves upon the sea without anchor or destination. For centuries, Ronin lived lives of hardship, uncertainty, and sometimes legend. A Ronin was created when a samurai lost his master. This could happen when a lord was killed in battle, forced to commit seppuku, or stripped of his lands by the shogunate. Under the strict rules of feudal Japan, a samurai's identity was tied entirely to his lord. When that bond was broken, he was left adrift, cast out from the structure that defined his life. In the Edo period, with its long peace, this became even harsher. Samurai were not allowed to simply move between lords at will. Employment was limited, stipends were few, and many found themselves permanently excluded. For some, Ronin, life became a constant struggle to survive. Without stipends of rice from a daimyo, they had no guaranteed income. Some became wandering teachers, opening dojo where they taught swordsmanship, calligraphy, or strategy. Others worked as bodyguards for merchants, protecting caravans or noble families. Many drifted into poverty, forced to live in cramped houses on the edge of towns where their swords were worth little more than a symbol of a past life. The image of the Ronin in society was complicated. On one hand, they were seen as dangerous. A samurai with no master and no clear duty could be unpredictable, even lawless. Authorities feared groups of Ronin gathering together, because in times of famine or unrest, they could form bands that challenged local power. Some became mercenaries, fighting in uprisings or offering their swords to whoever would pay. Others slipped into outright banditry. To many peasants, the sight of Ronin passing through was a cause for fear as much as admiration. Yet not all Ronin were villains. Many became cultural icons, remembered for their honor even without a lord. The most famous example is the 47 Rōnin, also known as the Akko incident. In 1701, Lord Asano Naganori of Akko was insulted and provoked by the shogunate official Kira Yoshinaka. Unable to contain his anger, Asano drew his sword in Edo Castle and wounded Kira. A grave crime, as drawing a weapon in the shogun's palace was forbidden. As punishment, Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, and his lands were confiscated. Overnight, hundreds of his retainers became Ronin. Among them were 47 who secretly vowed to avenge their master. For nearly 2 years, they hid their intentions. Some disguised themselves as merchants, others as monks, living lives of humiliation while they plotted. Then, in the winter of 1703, they struck. In the dead of night, they stormed Kira's mansion, fighting their way through his guards until they found him hiding in a shed. They killed him and carried his head to the grave of their lord Asano. Afterward, they surrendered themselves to the authorities. The shogunate ordered them to commit seppuku, which they did without hesitation. This story became one of the most famous tales in Japanese history. Plays, books, and later films retold the tale of the loyal Ronin who avenged their lord despite the consequences. To the people, they represented the highest ideals of Bushido: loyalty, courage, and sacrifice, even though technically they were outlaws. The 47 Rōnin showed that even without masters, samurai could still embody the values of their class. But the Akko Rōnin were the exception, not the rule. Most masterless samurai did not find glory in history books. They lived hard, often miserable lives. Some wandered from province to province, begging for food, their swords the only proof of their status. Others gathered in castle towns, where they sought employment as guards or scribes. In times of famine, their poverty could be extreme. Contemporary accounts describe Ronin pawning their swords just to buy food. a shameful act for men who once carried the soul of the samurai at their sides. One of the most famous Ronin was Miyamoto Musashi. Born in 1584, he lost his father young and grew up with little stability. Without a master, he lived much of his life as a wandering duelist, challenging rivals across Japan. Musashi fought over 60 duels, never once defeated. His unorthodox style, using 2 swords at once or arriving late to unnerve his opponents, broke from tradition. Yet it brought him victory after victory. Musashi's life as a Ronin gave him the freedom to develop his own school of strategy, Niten Ichi-ryu, and to write the Book of 5 Rings, one of the most influential texts on combat and philosophy. His story shows that being Ronin was not only about disgrace, it could also mean independence, innovation, and personal mastery. The presence of Ronin became especially visible during the Edo period, when Japan was at peace under the Tokugawa shogunate. With no wars to fight, many samurai had little to do. Those who lost their masters could not easily find new employment. Estimates suggest that by the 17th century, there were tens of thousands of Ronin wandering Japan. They became a constant reminder of the flaws in the rigid social system. Officials worried about their potential for unrest, while ordinary people alternately admired and feared them. Literature and theater of the time reflected this fascination. Kabuki plays often featured Ronin as tragic figures, men who had lost everything but still clung to their swords and honor. In ukiyo-e woodblock prints, Ronin were depicted as wanderers in the snow, cloaked in rags but carrying the unmistakable daisho at their sides. These images fed the public imagination, turning real hardship into legend. In reality, many Ronin lived double lives. Some kept their dignity, finding honest work or dedicating themselves to teaching. Others fell into gambling, drinking, or crime. A Ronin's sword could open doors, but it could also make him a target for suspicion. For a class that valued stability and order, the Ronin embodied chaos, the wave man drifting with no anchor. Still, their existence revealed an important truth. The samurai system claimed to be eternal, bound by unbreakable loyalty. But the Ronin showed that this loyalty had limits. A master's death, a shogun's decree, or the chaos of politics could strip a samurai of his place in an instant. In that sense, the Ronin were living proof of the fragility of the social order. And yet, some of them became legends precisely because they lived outside that order. Musashi the duelist, the 47 Rōnin, and countless nameless wanderers all showed that honor did not belong only to those with lords. It could be found even in the life of the Masterless. The story of the Ronin did not end with individual duels or acts of vengeance. Their existence shaped Japanese society, politics, and culture for centuries. They stood as living contradictions, bound to the code of the samurai, yet forced to live outside of its structure. The Tokugawa shogunate, ruling from the early 1600s to the mid-1800s, was obsessed with order. Every man had his place. Peasants worked the land, artisans crafted, merchants traded, and samurai served their lords. Ronin broke this design. They were samurai without lords, warriors without wars. Their very presence was a reminder that the system could fail. To the government, they were both embarrassing and dangerous. Some Ronin became symbols of resistance. During uprisings and famines, groups of Ronin sometimes joined peasant rebellions. They brought military skill to otherwise untrained mobs, and this made them feared. Shogunate records describe efforts to track, register, and sometimes forcibly employ Ronin to prevent unrest. But this was never fully successful. In the shadows of society, bands of masterless men moved constantly, their swords both a shield and a threat. Yet at the same time, Ronin could also be admired. Many commoners looked up to them because they lived outside the suffocating rules of the feudal order. A samurai tied to his lord had obligations that left little freedom. A Ronin, poor as he might be, was at least his own man. This paradox fascinated Japanese artists. In kabuki theater, Ronin were tragic heroes. In woodblock prints, they were depicted in dramatic poses, walking alone under the moonlight or confronting injustice. The tension between disgrace and freedom gave them a special place in the imagination. One of the clearest examples of this tension is the tale of the 47 Rōnin. Their revenge against Kira Yoshinaka was celebrated by the people, yet it posed a dilemma for the government. If the shogunate spared them, it would appear weak, as if outlaws could act outside the law. If it executed them harshly, it would risk angering the public, who saw the Ronin as heroes. The solution was symbolic. The Ronin were ordered to commit seppuku. In this way, they died honorably, maintaining their dignity while still satisfying the law. Their graves at Sengakuji Temple became a pilgrimage site, and to this day, people honor their loyalty. Other Ronin left their mark in quieter ways. Miyamoto Musashi's Book of Five Rings became a manual not just for warriors, but for strategists, businessmen, and martial artists centuries later. His life as a wandering Ronin gave him a perspective that a sheltered samurai might never have had. He was not limited by one school or one master. He created something new, something enduring. In his independence, we can see the hidden advantage of the Ronin life. But for the majority, the story was less glorious. Countless Ronin lived and died in obscurity. They took on menial jobs, hid their swords, or simply starved. Their anonymity is part of their tragedy. We remember the great duels, the revenge plots, the philosophers and masters, but behind them were thousands of forgotten men, each with a story we will never know. When Japan began to modernize in the 19th century, the Ronin became symbols once again. Western writers and travelers arriving in Japan romanticized them as wandering knights, comparing them to medieval outlaws or lone gunslingers. In this way, the image of the Ronin merged with global archetypes of freedom and rebellion. The idea of the masterless warrior spoke to universal themes. What happens when duty is broken? And what does honor mean when the old rules no longer apply? The cultural legacy of the Ronin is enormous. Films, novels, and manga have kept their spirit alive. From Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, where masterless warriors defend a village, to modern anime and video games, the Ronin continues to inspire. They represent resilience, independence, and the courage to walk alone. And perhaps that is the heart of their story. The Ronin were not simply failed samurai. They were men caught between worlds, stripped of certainty, yet still bound to ideals. Some fell into despair, others into crime. Some rose to greatness, others vanished without a trace. Together, they reveal that even in a rigid system, there are always those who live in the margins, defining their own path. The samurai ideal was loyalty until death. The Ronin asked a different question. What happens after death? What happens when loyalty is no longer possible? Their lives were not just about survival, but about redefining honor in a world that had cast them out. The Ronin remind us that even in the most ordered societies, there will always be those who live outside the lines. And sometimes it is these outsiders, the wanderers, the rebels, the masterless, who leave the deepest mark on history.